Story 1. In 2003, I returned home from my first year of college. I had decided to switch schools and degrees and attend a local music technical college instead. I moved back into my parents' home and drove into the city each day for classes. In order to save on parking, I purchased a permit to park in a church's lot. This lot was about 10 blocks from the school, so I had a decent walk each day. About a week into classes, I was on my walk, smoking a cigarette, when out of nowhere a homeless man appears right next to me. He looks as you might imagine. Late 50s, messy salt and pepper hair, flannel jacket, snow pants, work boots with no laces. He leaned in and asked, "Hey buddy, can I get a smoke?" Now, I was 19 at the time and a bit cocky. I was going to give him one, but he had to work for it. I told him he could have one, but he would have to walk with me to class and keep me company while he smoked it. He agreed and off we went. We exchanged names and asked each other basic questions about our lives. The normal pleasantries. About a block from school, we tossed our butts, and he leans in again and says, "Hey buddy, I gotta ask, got any spare change?" I replied, "Sorry, but I don't keep change on me." At the time I tossed all my spare change in some glass milk jugs I had in my room. So we parted ways that day. I kid you not, 2 weeks later this man had memorized my class schedule. Every single day, this man would meet me at the corner, ask for a smoke and walk me to class, every day asking me for change, and me having none. This continued for almost 15 months. The school I went to didn't have summer breaks. So now it's just a few weeks away from graduation. It's the end of winter. I'm getting ready in the morning for class. I put on my leather trench coat, grab my book bag and head for the door. I look down at the floor and see 2 glass milk jugs overflowing with change. I look down at the huge pockets in my coat, then back at the change jars. I'm gonna do it. I take each milk jar and turn them upside down into each pocket. You have no idea how much 2 gallons of change actually weighs. Then I head off for school. Things start off like normal. He meets me at the corner. I give him a smoke. We set off. I'm trying my best to step lightly, as to not make my pockets jingle, and I can't look him in the face because I don't want to totally lose it. We finally get to the end of our walk. We tossed our cigarettes. He turned to me and said, "Hey buddy, I gotta ask, you got any change?" So I turn to him and say, "Okay, I'm gonna make you a deal. I will give you all the change I have in my pockets if you promise to never ask me for change again. Deal?" He nods his head in agreement and holds out his one hand, palm up. "No, you don't understand," I said. "I have a lot of change." So he holds out both hands, cupping them together. He stands there with a questioning look on his face, so I grab the bottom of his sweatshirt and pull it up and make him hold it like a hammock. I then proceed to start shoveling handfuls of change into its sweatshirt. Handful after handful, and his eyes are getting wider in sheer disbelief. Just when he thinks I'm about finished, I switch to the other pocket. More and more change. Its sound is echoing between the buildings, and both of us are laughing uncontrollably. I finally finished. He thanked me and waddled off like a pregnant woman, and I went to class. The next day was bright and sunny. I park my car at the church. I'm walking, big smile on my face. He meets me at the corner, also with a big smile on his face. He leans in with a huge grin and says, "Hey buddy, can I smoke?" Asterisk long pause asterisk. "Yay buddy, you can have a smoke." Story 2. As a young adult fresh out of college, I found myself settling into the bustling city life. The anonymity of the city streets provided a sense of freedom, but it also brought me face to face with a variety of characters, some of whom seemed to possess an unwarranted sense of entitlement. Little did I know that one encounter with an entitled individual would forever be etched in my memory. Let me set the scene. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and I decided to explore a local bookstore. The smell of old books greeted me as I stepped through the door, and I relished the tranquility of the space. As I strolled through the aisles, my eyes danced across shelves filled with literary wonders. Suddenly, my attention was captured by an animated conversation happening nearby. Intrigued, I moved closer to the source of the commotion. Two women, one older and the other younger, stood near the fantasy section, arguing over a single copy of a highly anticipated novel. The older woman was the epitome of entitlement, with her haughty demeanor and disdainful expression. "Excuse me, young lady," the older woman barked, her voice dripping with condescension. "I had my eye on that book first. I demand that you give it to me immediately." I watched as the younger woman, who appeared to be around my age, raised an eyebrow and replied, "Actually, ma'am, I've been searching for this book for weeks. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to give it up." The entitled woman's face contorted into a mixture of anger and disbelief. She leaned in closer to the younger woman and hissed, "How dare you speak to me like that? I am a loyal customer of this bookstore, and I deserve that book more than you do." At this point, I couldn't resist getting involved. It was like watching a train wreck unfold, and I just had to witness it up close. Stepping forward, I interjected with a polite tone, "Excuse me, ladies? I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Might I suggest a compromise? Perhaps you could both read the book together and share your thoughts afterward." The entitled woman scoffed, giving me a disdainful look. "And who are you to interfere? This is none of your business." I couldn't help but respond with a hint of sarcasm. "Oh, forgive me, Your Highness. I'm just a lowly bystander trying to bring peace to the kingdom of literature." My remark seemed to further enrage the entitled woman. She glared at me, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "How dare you mock me? I'll have you know that I demand respect." The young woman beside me stifled a laugh, clearly amused by the absurdity of the situation. She turned to the entitled woman and said, "Look, I understand that you want the book, but that doesn't give you the right to act this way. It's just a book, after all." The entitled woman's anger reached its boiling point. With a sudden burst of fury, she reached out and attempted to snatch the book from the younger woman's hands. The bookstore fell into a hushed silence as their struggle ensued, books falling from nearby shelves in the chaos. Before I knew it, store employees rushed to our aid, separating the two women and restoring order to the bookstore. The entitled woman was escorted out, her demands and angry protests echoing in the air. As the dust settled, I turned to the younger woman, who was slightly shaken but still wearing a smirk. "Well, that was an adventure, huh?" She chuckled and extended her hand. "I'm Emily, by the way. Thanks for stepping in back there." I shook her hand warmly, introducing myself as well. We spent the next hour chatting about our shared love for books, and she recommended a few titles I had never heard of. It turned out that this encounter led to a new friendship, a bond formed in the face of entitlement and chaos. That day at the bookstore taught me a valuable lesson about entitlement and the power of standing up for what is right. It also reminded me to approach life with a touch of sarcasm, for sometimes it's the best defense against those who think they deserve everything. And as I continued my journey through the city streets, I knew that I would encounter more entitled individuals, but armed with the memory of that day, I felt ready to face them head-on. After all, life is too short to let entitled people ruin the joy of a good book or the simple pleasures of everyday encounters. Story 3. Please allow me to note well in advance, this story is not mine. In fact, it's a rather popular story in a town I once lived in Savannah, Georgia, and centers around a homeowner who became extremely annoyed with a movie producer. There will be a note at the end about the person this story is about for those interested. So, first and foremost, when movie producers are looking for places to set a movie that takes place in colonial or even 1800 cities in the United States, they often select Savannah, Georgia. Due to the sheer number of parks, wide roads, and period houses, it's an ideal location. They'll pull the Spanish moss out of the trees or trim it back, pour dirt on the roads around the squares, and effectively backdate that part of the city to fit most any place, even up to some having used the area as a setting for places like early Washington, D.C., or even places in Britain or France. Typically, when producers do this, they pay each homeowner whose house is used as background a couple $1,000s for licensing. That will be important later, trust me. They issue some rules, like no electric lights being visible, not coming out of any door that faces the street, and homeowners must move their cars away from the drive if they have one. In 1979, a producer came from Hollywood with the intention of using Savannah for that very purpose. Specifically, the producer was from one of the major television networks and was working on a made-for-television movie about the events after the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln and the subsequent accusations against the doctor present at his death. The production team went to the city to seek permission, then sent an announcement to each of the homeowners, telling them the various days that filming was going to take place. However, much to their dismay, the production company also noted that the homeowners would not be compensated for the use of their homes as backdrops. This was met with frustration by the homeowners, who turned to the city for help, only to be told that it was their civic duty to allow the use of their homes. Most of them reluctantly agreed to this and bit their tongues. One homeowner, however, didn't. He decided to get back at the production company by trying to disrupt their filming every chance he got. He first started by leaving his car out in front of his house, only to have it towed before filming began. He threatened legal action against the studio, but that fell on deaf ears. He even forbade the use of his home in some of the shots, but the production company got the city to force him to back down. Eventually, he had enough. He waited, biding his time until he was certain they were filming. On the day his house was being used as a background shot, the homeowner grabbed a massive flag from Nazi Germany and hung it out of one of the top windows. The production company was horrified. They knew this ruined any shot they had used there, and worse, they began to question how long the flag had been there. Had it just been that one day, or had the previous shots, some of which showed the house from across the square, been ruined as well? They turned to the city for help, but the city just shrugged, saying that it was his First Amendment right to do that. They also implied that had the production company paid the homeowners, as had always been done before, this probably wouldn't have happened. In the end, the production company had to stop filming and go to the homeowner, begging him to remove the flag. He did so, but only after his lawyer secured a contract requiring the production company to pay all the homeowners for using their homes in the background. The flag came down, and filming wrapped up in less than a day. Interestingly, it's said that in the movie in question, The Ordeal of Dr. Mudd, there are several shots where you can see a bright red flag from Nazi Germany flying from one of the homes in the distance. That stunt cost the producer quite a lot of money and delayed production by at least a year, while they tried to find every single instance of the flag appearing in the background shots. This homeowner would later go on to become quite famous himself, though not for a good reason. Even so, he lives on in the legends of that city, both for his revenge against the movie producer and his later brush with fame. Story 4. My boy's been playing since he was 5, and I've always encouraged him to give it his all on the field. He's a good kid, listens to his coach, and plays fair. But some parents just can't handle the idea of their precious angels not being the star of the show. It all started on a regular Saturday morning. I dropped my son off for practice like usual, chatting with some of the other parents before settling in to watch. That's when I noticed her, this woman I'd seen at a few games before, always yelling from the sidelines. She had that look about her, you know? The kind that screams, "My kid is the next Messi, and everyone else better get out of the way." Anyway, the kids were scrimmaging, and my boy went for the ball. He and this woman's son both reached it at the same time, and there was a bit of a tussle. Nothing major, just normal soccer stuff. But you'd think my kid had committed a war crime from the way she started shrieking. The woman started yelling at the referee, demanding that my son be sent off for playing too rough. She kept insisting that he could have hurt her son and that this was just practice, not the World Cup. I couldn't believe it. The coach, who was refereeing, just shook his head and told her to calm down. But she wasn't having it. When I'd had enough, I stood up and called out to her, asking her to quiet down and let the kids play. I reminded her that they were just having fun and being competitive, and that they were teammates after all. She whirled around, her face red with anger. She cursed at me, telling me to shut up and claiming I didn't know anything. I was shocked. Who talks like that at a kid's soccer practice? But before I could say anything else, she did something I still can't believe. She started sprinting towards the field, right at my son. I watched in horror as she slid, cleats first, and tackled my 8-year-old boy to the ground. Everything after that was a blur. I ran onto the field, shoving her off my son. I was terrified he was hurt, but thankfully he seemed okay, just shaken up. The coach came running over, yelling at the top of his lungs. The coach demanded to know what she thought she was doing and ordered her to get off the field immediately. When she tried to protest, he cut her off, telling her she was banned from practice forever and threatening to call the police if she didn't leave. She tried to argue, but the coach wasn't having it. A couple of other parents stepped in to escort her off the field while I checked on my son. As she was leaving, she kept yelling about how unfair it all was and how she'd be back. But the coach stood firm, reiterating his threat to call the police if she ever showed up again. After she left, things calmed down a bit. The other parents were great, making sure my son was okay and offering support. The coach gathered all the kids and had a talk with them about sportsmanship and how what that woman did was completely unacceptable. I thought that was the end of it, but oh boy, was I wrong. A few days later, I got a call from the league's administration. Apparently, that woman had filed a formal complaint against my son, me, and the coach. She claimed we were bullying her and her son, and that the coach was playing favorites. I couldn't believe it. But here's the kicker: the league had security cameras set up around the field. They reviewed the footage and saw exactly what happened. Not only did they dismiss her complaint, but they also banned her and her son from the entire league. It turns out, this wasn't the first time she'd caused problems. Other parents and coaches had complained about her behavior before, but this was the final straw. The league even sent out a letter to all the parents, reminding them about proper sideline behavior and the consequences of crossing the line. My son, he's doing great. If anything, this whole mess has made him even more determined on the field. He tells me he wants to show that woman that he can be a great player without resorting to dirty tactics. As for me, I'm just glad it's over. I never thought I'd have to deal with something like this at a kid's soccer practice, but I guess entitled people can pop up anywhere. At least now we can all focus on what really matters, letting the kids play and have fun. Story 5. A recent petty revenge story made me remember this experience from my teenage years. But this one definitely went all the way to pro. Strap in, it's going to be long. So, just before my senior year in high school, I turned 18 and bought a car with my saved-up years of babysitting money. I'd have liked one sooner, but my mother absolutely refused. At 18, in my big act of teenage rebellion, I went out and bought one. A couple months later, Auntie Witch suddenly left her job from several states away and moved in with us, without her car. It cost less if she waited 6 months until spring to get it shipped. Something about snowbird travel patterns. She was cheap and a user as well as a jerk. As a result, I was expected to share my recently acquired car with Auntie Witch until hers arrived. This seemed deeply unfair, but nonetheless it was agreed upon that she could use it for appointments and job interviews since I could take the school bus. I needed to be warned in advance because my bus stop was the second one of the route. It left a lot earlier than I needed to if driving directly, and I liked sleeping. You may be wondering about now what this has to do with an alarm clock. Auntie Witch is one of those people who likes to rile people up, then mock them for getting mad. She's always got a complaint, harsh words, and is feuding with somebody over something. Once she moved in with us, her complaint was my alarm clock. My room shared a wall with hers. The alarm was waking up her mooching, unemployed, broke self every morning, and that got her angry. Couldn't I just go to bed earlier so I didn't need an alarm clock? The morning schedule at our house went something in the ballpark of this. 5:30 a.m. my workaholic mother leaves for the office. 5:45 a.m. my alarm goes off if taking the bus to school. 6:15 a.m. my alarm goes off if driving to school. 6:15 I leave if taking the bus to school. 6:45 I leave if driving to school. 1:30 never. Auntie Witch's unemployed self needs to be anywhere. Auntie Witch approached my workaholic mother about the horrific inconvenience of me using an alarm clock. Her solution was that my mother should wake me up every day at 5:30 before leaving. My mother told her to try earplugs or work it out between us. Workaholic mother was massively non-confrontational and wanted no part of an Auntie Witch dispute. Auntie Witch started sneaking into my room to unplug the clock after I fell asleep. I'm a hard sleeper, so she pulled this off a few times. I had a good number of tardies before I figured out it wasn't the new cat who initially got blamed. Woke up to see her standing over my bed one night. Creepy! I screamed like a banshee, waking the whole house. She claimed that she was sleepwalking, and my mother let her get away with that lame excuse. I endeavored to solve the problem myself with some superglue. Not the brightest move I made. That house got sold with a bonus electric blue alarm clock, and Auntie Witch started turning the alarm off instead of unplugging it. So I started sleeping with my alarm clock tucked behind my pillow. No way Auntie could do anything to it without waking me now. She was angry at having not gotten her way, and never let anything go ever. Auntie Witch's next move was to get up when the alarm went off and race into the only bathroom with a shower. It was closer to her room than mine, so she always beat me there. She'd stash magazines in there to sit on the commode reading until right around 6:20. This is after the school bus has left, but still before I need to leave driving directly. Once I was taking a very rushed shower, she'd steal my keys and take my car, wherever the hell the unemployed go to drive around all day. She claimed that I just wasn't paying attention when she said she needed the car. She wasn't telling me. When my mother wasn't around, she made snide remarks that if she was woken up, she had just as much right to the bathroom as I did. I could solve this problem by not waking her up. In addition to this, she would take my car evenings and weekends always right before I had babysitting gigs. It never returned with more than fumes in the gas tank. She had to call roadside assistance twice for running out of gas because she'd guessed wrong on how far she could get on fumes. Needless to say, I was mad. Also massively inconvenienced and a lot poorer. I had to beg my friends for last-minute rides or take a cab. She continued to blame me, and my mother stayed out of it. We got into a cat and mouse game with my keys, where I eventually kept them on me at all times, even in the shower. This was an old car some years back. No electronic keys were harmed. The keys came in the shower with me because the counter wasn't enough to stop her from pulling the bathroom lock pocket door. Trivial and coming in while I was showering to take them. Again, creepy. This eventually resulted in her asking in advance to borrow my car for a job interview that probably wasn't. She went to the key shop and got my car keys copied. The next day, my keys safely back in my possession, she pulls the shower stunt again. She did it a lot even when she wouldn't take my car. Auntie Witch was a witch. I head out to the driveway, keys in hand, and my car's not there. Legit thought she'd hot-wired it until I got home, and it showed no signs of tampering. I'm not much for poking the bear, but it was time to have this out. Auntie Witch quite smugly admitted to copying the key, called me a selfish person, and that I didn't know how to share, and many other unfortunate things I don't remember exactly. She wasn't giving it back. What was I going to do? I warned her that the car was mine, and she did not have permission to use it ever again. This was a bridge too far for me. There would be consequences. She laughed in my face. The next morning my car was not in the driveway. I'd expected this. My best friend's dad was a cop. I was practically a fixture in his house for a decade, and he was the closest thing I had to a father figure due to my own deadbeat dad. So I gave him a call, utterly distraught that the car I've worked so hard to get has been stolen from my driveway. He's very sympathetic. Did I mention my car had a law jack? It was actually a very nice car. Back when it was new anyway. We do all the reporting and whatever it takes for the cops to find it with law jack. By mid-afternoon, they'd found it in the parking lot of an outlet mall. I don't know what the full details of the encounter were, as I've heard multiple versions of this part of the story over the years. She made a big fuss upon being accused of theft, including a tussle with an officer. It ended in charges of grand theft auto, resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, and some kind of license-related thing because she'd never switched it to her new state of residence. Don't throw a tantrum at a cop. They don't like it much. As this all took some time, she didn't get arraigned that day. As her unemployed broke self had horrid credit and little money, she couldn't make bail. As I deleted her answering machine message begging my mother to come bail her out, my workaholic mother didn't even notice she was gone for almost a week. Once my workaholic mommy did notice, I explained that my car had been stolen and I called the cops. I was handling the situation myself like she suggested. The look of dawning horror was amazing. Then she shrugged and went back to avoiding all confrontation. Auntie Witch served 2 weeks in county lockup until she took a plea deal. I suspect they slowly walked her paperwork a bit. What happened after was glorious revenge. Auntie Witch's remaining savings were used up on all the fines and court fees, so she finally got around to shipping her car and engaging in a job hunt. One problem: she was previously a teacher. She'd yet to get her certification in her new state. Now she had a rap sheet and was unable to pass the background check. Whoops! Time for a new career as a telemarketer. Auntie Witch didn't bother me much after that. I learned years later she only went after kids hard, and I had proved enough of an adult. She realized there were consequences for her actions. We spent the next few months ignoring each other before I headed to college. And that's how a dispute over an alarm clock ended Auntie Witch's teaching career. Edited to answer a few repeat questions. What's up with your mother? Mental illness. She was not a bad person. She simply had almost no capacity to deal with conflict and retreated into her work as a coping mechanism. With time and understanding, I am sympathetic to her role. She has since passed away. Why didn't you call the cops sooner? I had never dealt with anybody so lacking boundaries like Auntie Witch before. I genuinely thought there was a limit, and I just had to handle things until we got there in the name of family harmony. It was also supposed to be temporary. I had college coming up quickly, and she was supposed to find a job apartment, so it was very time-bound. It's the nuclear option to call the cops on a family member, and a very scary thing to contemplate at 18 years old. I also wasn't sure it would work given she could claim I was confused about permission, and the chances my mother would back me up were close to zero. Once I still had my keys in hand and no car in the driveway, that was a game changer in my eyes. Can we get more of an epilogue? There's not a lot to say. I went no contact with Auntie Witch after leaving for college. Between her prison stint and my departure, she ignored me and I returned the favor. I found out later that she only seriously picks on kids. I'd proved myself an adult who could deliver consequences for her actions. Now I spend holidays with my husband's lovely family and visit the stable family members at other times. Somehow I have hair washing to do every reunion. Whoops. She's never gone back to teaching. Story 6. I live in a consolidated county. That means that the city and county governments merged some years back, ostensibly to reduce administrative and infrastructure costs. This is important because services like fire, police, utilities, and trash pickup are now managed by former county officials, and not the city officials. Many of these services are also much more inefficient, and some services have been outsourced to private companies. My municipality outsourced trash and yard waste pickup a few years ago, and the two companies who now do those collections are woefully inadequate, and their services cost more than when the city or county did it. They both have similar sets of rules about what can be put out for collection, take fewer types of waste away, and no longer come 2 days a week as the city once did, but now only come 1 day a week. We're all paying more money for less service. Now that the background is done, here's the story. I did some yard work over the course of a couple of weekends last summer, cutting some limbs, trimming some shrubbery, and cutting down a dead tree in my backyard. Knowing what the rules are for how much yard waste, limbs, leaves, and such can be put out, I bagged everything that was supposed to be bagged, filling up 3 of them. Things like leaves and small clippings, weeds, and such. The paper bags for yard waste from the big box home improvement stores are what they require, so I use those. I just fill them halfway up so as to not make them too heavy for the waste collectors, even though there are no written weight restrictions. However, if a bag is too full, they will knock it over to spill out the contents, so they then don't have to pick it up. I cut the larger limbs down to under 4 feet in length, or they wouldn't be picked up. Anything at all they can do to get out of picking something up, they will do. And they almost always leave a horrendous mess behind when they do pick things up. The pile put out for collection is not allowed to be any wider than 10 feet, nor any deeper or higher than 5 feet, nor may it contain any piece longer than 4 feet. All bags must be placed in a row, no more than 3 feet away from the limb pile. My pile was maybe 4 inches longer than the 10 feet, and only because of the tiny ends of the limbs smaller than a toothpick hanging out of the pile. The pile was no higher than 3 feet, and no deeper than 4 feet. In other words, it fell within the size limits, except for a few twigs with leaves. I also had the 3 bags, each about half full of clippings and leaves, all lined up exactly as required, and about 2 feet away from the main pile. They were scheduled to come on a Tuesday, but when I got home from work that afternoon, it was all still there. There was a pre-printed notice on my door that my pickup exceeded the prescribed size limits, and the note said that I would be required to either pay a $250 oversized load fee, or reduce the size of the pile by half to make it fit into the limit. This is where revenge comes in. I had the next 2 days off, so the next morning, bright and early, I got out the hedge trimmers. I trimmed the ends of the pile back to exactly 9 feet in length. After carefully laying those trimmed bits on top of the pile, I went to the backyard, where the limbs I had not trimmed up the week before were stacked for the following week's pile, and found 4 long, fairly straight limbs. I removed all the smaller limbs and leaves from these limbs, ending up with 4 moderately straight poles, each about 7 feet long. I marked 1-foot intervals on each pole in fluorescent orange paint and stuck them in the ground, out at the curb in the front yard at the corners of a rectangle exactly 5 feet wide and 10 feet long. I then got out the surveyor's tape, bright pink plastic tape used to mark property corners, and tied it onto and around the stakes at the height of 5 feet. This established a visual outline of the volume I was required to stay within. I made absolutely sure that everything in the pile was completely inside the poles and below 5 feet in height. This required adding almost 2/3 of the remaining pile in the backyard to the stack out front, to bring it up to 4 feet 6 inches in width, 4 feet 6 inches in depth, and 9 feet 6 inches in length, and no pieces longer than 46 inches. The pile was almost twice as much material as before. I carried each of the 3 bags of clippings to the backyard, and filled each of them up as much as possible, while still being able to fold over the tops and staple shut each bag. I also included small sections of the ends of larger limbs, for added weight. The bags were now completely filled and weighed more than twice what they had before. I had to use the hand truck to get them out to the curb. They were so heavy. Oh, and all the extra clippings I had generated filled up 2 more bags, so the total was now 5 bags, the company limit. I then went inside, called the company, and very nicely asked that they come to pick up my yard waste. Since they had not done so on Tuesday, they agreed to send out a truck and crew, and told me I would have to pay the fee. "Come on then," I told them. They soon arrived, and happened to be the same crew that normally comes to my neighborhood. I pulled a 25-foot Stanley tape measure from my pocket and asked them to measure the poles to confirm that the space was within the required limits. They did so and agreed the pile was not oversized, and proceeded to spend the next 2 hours manually loading it all onto their truck. Oh, and it took both of them to manhandle each of those bags into the back of the truck too. I told them, very nicely, and with a smile, that I knew what 10 feet was, pointed to the fence where it was marked with orange electrical tape, and thanked them for coming to pick up my yard waste. The 2 tired, sweaty waste disposal guys just groaned, got in their truck, and drove off. There was no extra fee added to my bill for that month. Never has been since. Now, I know they got paid for their time, and I know that I had to do a lot of extra work on my day off. But since last July, I have not once ever had them leave so much as a single leaf on the ground in front of my house. They had to actually do some hard work, with me standing there in shorts, smiling and drinking cold water while they were sweating.